Don't worry about the suitcases, Elias. The staff here will bring them up to your room. It's a lovely room, really. It has a view of the garden. Or maybe it was the parking lot. Either way, it's much more than a person in your condition needs. My brother Arthur didn't even look at me as he spoke. He was too busy adjusting the silk pocket square in his $3,000 suit, checking his reflection in the tinted windows of the facility's lobby. He thought he was disposing of a nuisance. He thought he was finally clearing the board, so he could claim our mother's $80 million estate for himself. He saw a tired, middle-aged man who had spent the last decade drifting and working from home in a small apartment. He saw a brother who was weak, a brother who could be bullied into a nursing home under the guise of early onset cognitive decline. What he didn't see was the phone in my pocket, currently displaying a notification from a private server in Zurich. He didn't know that, while he was busy forging medical evaluations to have me declared incompetent, I was busy reviewing the fourth quarter audits of the Beaumont Global Trust, the very entity that owned his house, his car, and the very air he breathed. "You're doing the right thing, Arthur," I said softly, my voice intentionally thin. Mother always said you were the one with the vision for the family's future. Arthur let out a sharp, condescending laugh, finally a moment of lucidity. "It's a shame it came so late, Elias. Enjoy the pudding. I hear they serve it at 4 p.m. sharp." He turned on his heel and walked out, the glass doors of the Silver Oaks luxury senior living facility swinging shut behind him with a final heavy thud. He was heading straight to the lawyer's office to finalize the probate of our mother's will. He thought he had won. He thought he had just signed my commitment papers. He had no idea he had actually triggered the morality clause of the family trust. And as of 10 minutes ago, I had already initiated a full capital call on every single one of his personal assets. To understand how we got to the gates of a nursing home, you have to understand the dynamic. Arthur and I had shared for 40 years. Arthur was the golden boy. He was the one who went to the right schools, joined the right clubs, and eventually took over the public face of our family's real estate empire. He was loud, aggressive, and obsessed with the optics of wealth. To the world, Arthur was the heir apparent. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. I was the one who preferred books to boardrooms. I stayed at home with our mother, Eleanor, during her final years. Arthur called it leeching. He called it hiding from the real world. He didn't understand why Mother kept me around, or why she seemed to whisper with me for hours behind closed doors while he was out making power moves in the city. Arthur assumed my lack of a corporate title meant a lack of intelligence. He assumed my silence was a sign of submission. But there was a secret. My mother and I shared one that Arthur, in his arrogance, never bothered to investigate. Our family's wealth wasn't held in the real estate company he managed. That company was merely a shell, a front designed to keep the tax authorities and the paparazzi busy. The real wealth, the billions accumulated over 3 generations, was locked inside the Beaumont Global Trust, an irrevocable, discretionary trust governed by a set of bylaws, so complex they required a PhD in fiduciary law to navigate. And for the last 15 years, I wasn't working from home on some failed novel. I was the chief managing trustee. I was the secret expert who approved Arthur's bonuses, signed off on his expense reports, and quietly corrected the catastrophic legal errors he made in his brilliant real estate deals. Mother passed away 3 weeks ago. That's when the mask finally slipped. The funeral wasn't even over before. Arthur cornered me in the library of the family estate. The scent of lilies was still thick in the air, but Arthur's breath smelled of expensive scotch and greed. "We need to talk about the transition, Elias," he said, throwing a thick folder onto the mahogany desk. "Mother's will is very specific about the house and the liquid assets, but you're a liability. You've spent your life as a shut-in. You have no grasp of the current economic climate. I understand more than you think, Arthur. I replied, sitting quietly in the corner chair. Do you? Because the doctors I've spoken to suggest otherwise. They say the way you've isolated yourself, the way you talk to imaginary business associates on the phone at 2:00 a.m. It's a sign of a breakdown, a cognitive decline. You've already filed the paperwork for a temporary conservatorship. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. A conservatorship? Arthur, we're brothers. Surely we can discuss this. There's nothing to discuss. I'm protecting the family legacy. I'm moving you to Silver Oaks. It's top tier. You'll have 24-hour care. And in exchange, you'll sign over your voting rights in the family holdings. To me, it's for your own good. He didn't realize that by threatening my autonomy, he had stepped onto a landmine. The Beaumont Global Trust had a very specific morality clause. Section 14. To any beneficiary who attempts to use legal coercion, fraud, or unethical manipulation to seize the assets or restrict the freedom of another beneficiary shall be deemed unfit. Upon such a determination by the managing trustee, said beneficiary's interests shall be immediately suspended, and a full clawback of all trust, distributed assets shall be enacted. Arthur thought he was the one holding the pen. He didn't realize I was the one who owned the ink if that's what you think is best. Arthur, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. I just want what's best for Mother's memory. Good, he snapped, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. The car will be here tomorrow morning. Pack light. You won't need much where you're going. As he walked out of the room, he stopped and looked back at the portraits of our ancestors lining the walls. By this time next month, Elias will have sold this drafty old museum and broken ground on the Beaumont Plaza, a 60-story monument to the man who actually did something with this name. He was talking about the Greenwich Project, a massive commercial development he had been obsessing over for years. He had leveraged everything to get the permits. He had borrowed millions against his expected inheritance to fund the initial construction. He was standing on a glass floor, and he was about to start dancing. The next morning, I allowed him to lead me to the car. I allowed him to check me into the nursing home. I even played along as he spoke to the head nurse, Mrs. Gable, explaining that I was prone to delusions of grandeur and that my phone usage should be monitored for my own mental health. But Mrs. Gable was an old friend of my mother's. And more importantly, the nursing home itself. It was owned by a subsidiary of a company that the Beaumont Global Trust had acquired 5 years ago. As soon as Arthur's sleek black Mercedes pulled out of the driveway, I stood up. My stooped posture vanished. The confusion in my eyes was replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a man who had spent 20 years calculating risks. Mr. Beaumont, Mrs. Gable said, stepping forward and handing me a fresh burner phone and a set of keys to the private office in the West Wing. Your legal team is on line 1. The auditors from the Cayman office are on line 2. And the administrative search warrant for your brother's office has just been cleared. I took the phone. Thank you, Martha. Did Arthur sign the entry acknowledgement form on his way out? He did, sir. He didn't even read it. He thought it was a visitor's log. I smiled. The entry acknowledgement form was actually a legal waiver. By signing it, Arthur had unknowingly consented to a discretionary audit of any and all accounts linked to the Beaumont name, including his private accounts he thought were hidden. It's time, I said into the phone. Activate the morality clause. I want a total freeze on the Greenwich project. Call in the loans. Trigger the tax clawbacks. And notify the board of the real estate firm that Arthur Beaumont is no longer an authorized signatory. I looked out the window. Arthur was probably at a celebratory lunch right now, ordering the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, he thought. He had buried me, but I wasn't the one in the grave. I was the one holding the shovel. The silence of the VIP suite at Silver Oaks was a luxury. Arthur didn't think I deserved to him. This was a prison cell. With better wallpaper to me, it was a command center. While the staff brought me chamomile tea, I sat behind a triple encrypted terminal. On the primary monitor, I watched the digital heartbeat of Arthur's empire, and it was starting to flatline. Revenge, when executed with professional precision, doesn't look like a physical fight. It looks like a series of administrative errors. It looks like red tape that suddenly turns into a noose. The first blow landed at 2:14 p.m. Arthur was at his favorite steakhouse, likely toasted to his brilliant move of sidelining me. His phone would have vibrated with a notification from his lead contractor at the Greenwich project. A stop work order had been issued by the city's building department. The reason? A discrepancy in the environmental impact indemnity clause. Specifically, the trust which owned the land had withdrawn its secondary guarantee. Without that guarantee, the project's insurance was void. Without insurance, the city pulled the permits. I took a sip of my tea. At 2:45 p.m., the second blow hit. Arthur's personal wealth was built on a foundation of mezzanine financing, essentially. He borrowed money against the value of his future inheritance to fund his current lifestyle. But the Beaumont Global Trust had a cross-collateralization trigger. The moment Arthur signed those commitment papers for me, he technically alienated a primary beneficiary. In the eyes of the trust's automated compliance software, Arthur had committed an act of fiduciary hostility. I watched as the capital call was initiated. Every loan Arthur had taken out was now due in full, immediately. $48 million in liquid capital, demanded by the banks within 72 hours. My phone rang. It was Arthur. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, knowing he was probably screaming into the receiver in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Around 4 p.m., the door to my suite burst open. Arthur didn't knock. He looked like a man who had been hit by a high-speed train. His tie was loosened. His face was a blotchy shade of purple, and he was sweating through his bespoke shirt. "Elias, what the hell did you do?" he roared, slamming his hand down on my desk. "I didn't look up from my monitor." "I'm sorry, Arthur." "Mrs. Gable said. I was prone to delusions. "Perhaps you're hallucinating this conversation? Don't play games with me. The banks just froze my personal accounts. The Greenwich site is locked down, they are saying. There's a trustee overrule on my credit lines. You're the only one who had access to Mother's old files. Did you call them? Did you tell them I was incompetent?" "I didn't have to tell them anything." "Arthur," I said, finally turning my chair to face him. I kept my voice low, steady, and devoid of emotion. "The system is automated. It protects the assets from internal threats." "Internal threats? I am the head of the company." "You are the head of a shell," I corrected him. "And right now that shell is cracking. If I were you, I'd be less worried about me and more worried about the administrative search warrant currently being executed at your office." Arthur froze. "A what?" "You've been using trust funds to pay for the Greenwich permits, haven't you? You called it an inter-company loan, but under Section 8(4) of the Beaumont bylaws, that's classified as unauthorized self-dealing unless approved by the managing trustee, which, as you know, wasn't you." "The managing trustee was Mother," he screamed. "And she's dead. The position is vacant." "Is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Did you ever actually read the 2018 amendment, Arthur? Or were you too busy picking out the leather for your private jet?" I stood up. For the first time in years, I didn't play the part of the tired, broken brother. I stood tall, my eyes locking onto his with a predatory sharpness that made him physically recoil. "You thought I was working from home because I couldn't handle the real world," I said, stepping toward him. "The truth is, I was running the world you were merely playing in. Mother didn't keep me around out of pity. She kept me around because I was the only one she could trust to keep the Beaumont name from being dragged into the dirt by your incompetence." Arthur's phone rang again. He looked at the screen. His eyes went wide. "It's the board. They're calling an emergency session." "I know," I said. Checking my watch, I called it. "And since you've been stripped of your voting rights, due to the morality clause violation, you aren't invited. But don't worry, I'll send you a transcript of the meeting. From my new office. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm your brother, and I was your brother. Yesterday morning, when you signed the papers to have me locked in a room and drugged into silence, I replied. The difference is, I'm using the law. You were using a knife in the back. My way is much more permanent. The grand reveal didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the mahogany-lined boardroom of Beaumont Plaza. The very building Arthur thought he owned. The board members were all there, looking pale and anxious. These were men who had spent decades bowing to Arthur's whims, mostly because they were terrified of his temper. When the double doors opened, they all stood up, expecting to see Arthur coming in to explain the chaos. Instead, they saw me. I was wearing one of the suits. Arthur thought I didn't own a midnight blue charcoal wool tailored in London, and a watch that cost more than the car he used to drive me to the nursing home. Behind me walked a phalanx of 6 lawyers, each carrying a leather briefcase embossed with the seal of the Beaumont Global Trust. Gentlemen, I said, taking the seat at the head of the table, the power seat. Please sit. We have a lot of work to do and very little time to do it before the markets open. Elias, one of the older board members, Mr. Sterling, stammered. What is the meaning of this? Where is Arthur? Arthur is currently dealing with a tax clawback inquiry at his residence, I said, opening a file. It turns out that his lifestyle was being subsidized by unrecognized dividends from the trust. As the newly confirmed senior managing trustee, I have decided to terminate his employment with the firm effective. Immediately, the room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. On what grounds? Sterling asked. Moral turpitude, I said, sliding a document across the table. Specifically, the fraudulent attempt to declare a fellow beneficiary mentally incompetent for the purpose of seizing control of trust assets. It's all here. The forged medical reports, the bribes paid to the evaluating physicians, and the signed commitment papers. I looked around the room. The trust has a zero-tolerance policy for predatory litigation within the family. Arthur has triggered the automatic forfeiture sequence. As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, his shares have been reverted to the Treasury. His accounts have been liquidated to cover the outstanding debts of the Greenwich Project, and he is officially persona non grata. Just then the doors burst open again. Arthur was there, held back by 2 security guards. He looked disheveled, his hair a mess, his eyes wild. You can't do this, he yelled. This is my company. I built this. I didn't even turn around. You didn't build anything, Arthur. You inherited a legacy and treated it like a playground. You forgot that the playground has a landlord. I signaled to the security guards. Please escort Mr. Beaumont from the premises. He is no longer a tenant, an employee, or a shareholder. If he sets foot on any Beaumont property, including the family estate, he is to be arrested for trespassing. Arthur started to scream, a guttural, desperate sound of a man who realized the ground had finally disappeared beneath him. As they dragged him away, his voice echoed down the hallway, getting fainter and fainter until there was only silence. I turned back to the board. Now let's talk about the Greenwich Project. We're going to pivot. We're going to turn it into a low-income housing initiative with a focus on senior care. It'll be a tax write, off for the trust, and a PR win for the family. Do we have any objections? There were no objections. A week later, I stood on the balcony of our mother's estate. The air was crisp, and the gardens were finally starting to bloom. I had spent the morning signing the final papers for Arthur's bankruptcy. He was living in a studio apartment, now one of the few properties the trust didn't own. He was facing a series of civil suits and a potential criminal inquiry into the medical documents he had forged. He had called me dozens of times, begging for a meeting, for a loan, for a chance to explain. I hadn't answered a single one. Humility is a difficult lesson to learn when you've spent your life looking down on everyone else, Arthur. Had to learn it the hard way by looking up from the bottom. I looked down at the morality clause document on the table next to me. Mother had written it herself years ago after she saw the first glimmers of greed in Arthur's eyes. She knew this day would come. She knew I would be the one to have to pull the trigger. "It's done, Mother," I whispered into the wind. I wasn't the senile old man Arthur wanted me to be. I wasn't the secret expert anymore either. I was just a man who had finally cleaned his house. I picked up my tea, the same chamomile they served at Silver Oaks, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The view from the estate was much better than the view from the nursing home. But the peace of mind? That was exactly the same. In the end, power isn't about how loud you can scream or how much you can take. It's about knowing exactly which thread to pull to make the whole tapestry unravel. Arthur thought he was a king. He forgot that every king serves at the pleasure of the one who keeps the books.